now. It's going to start right now. Hello, everybody. It's John Ross here with the XPian Daily News Report, but today it's special. Today it's very special. We're going to have a friend, Dr. Vincent's 10 most important stories of 2020. That's what we're going to be talking about. And who's Dr. Vince? Well, it's Dr. Vincent. Here, we'll put it right up. It's Dr. Vincent Gaddis. He's a history professor and chair of history, philosophy, and theology at Benedictine University and Benedictine University. And we thank him for coming. And he's the professor. Like I said, he's a professor there. And I'm going to bring him up right now. He's been with us many times before. There he is. He's in his lounge chair, folks. He's relaxing.
Yes,
he's relaxing.
It's holiday time, so yes, I'm relaxing a little bit
with it. And please get that college. Is there a C in there? Is it Benedict?
Nope, you're right. Benedictine University.
Oh, yeah, it's spelled right. Okay. Mm-hmm. That school once was St. Procopius College, too. And I remember they had a prep school there, too. I don't know if that's still... That's
Bennett Academy.
Yeah, an academy. I remember in high school.
Bennett Academy's across the street. And, of course, we were originally St. Procopius College, then Illinois Benedictine College. And now, about 20 years ago, we switched over to Benedictine University.
Okay. That's what I thought. And yeah, I was up there when I was in high school and in college, I think, because I was a local guy with the college. So we went up there too for our track teams and stuff. I went there several times for track, I remember. Well, anyway, we're going to discuss the implications or ramifications, or we're going to discuss the 2020, what's the most important stories out there. And Dr. Gaddis has put this together, and I, we did some help here too, with some graphics and other things. But these are not, I think these, I don't know if these are in particular order of significance or not, but we're going to start out with the big one, though. I think most people would agree with this pretty big, right? Been out there for a while, the COVID-19. Dr. Gaddis, you want a little comment, your thoughts on why you thought COVID-19 was up there?
Sure. Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here with you again, John. And of course, COVID-19 has defined our world in 2020, right? COVID-19, as I'm not going to get into the science of the virus, but we know that it quickly spread all across the world starting in January. By March, we had shutdowns all over the country, all over the world. And I think the important thing that COVID has unleashed or uncovered this year and why it's so significant is a couple of things. I think number one, what COVID-19 did was it exposed every fissure, every disparity that we have in our country. Because of COVID, we saw that racial disparities in healthcare are real. We saw that the economic disparities between the wealthy and the poor are real. We found out that people who thought they were doing pretty decent, living decent middle-class lives, once furloughed, we found out that that was a precarious position. And uh, and so what COVID-19 did this year was really uncover and expose all of those deficiencies. I think one of the other things that it exposed is that, you know, those workers, many of whom we looked down upon a year ago, we now are calling essential. The
Yeah.
warehouse workers, fast food workers, uh, medical care workers, CNAs, and so on and so forth. That before we kind of looked down on people who worked in meat packing plants. Now we find out that they are what they really are, which is essential to our lives and to our well-being. I think the other thing COVID did this year was it exposed just how much we have based our lives really in fear, um, where and it's highlighted really our selfishness as a culture, because the truth is that rather than us confronting this virus in terms of let's all work together in positive ways to defeat the virus, what we've done is say it's all about me. If I don't believe in a mask, then I am not going to wear it. If I don't believe COVID is real, then I'm not going to believe it's real. We've seen as a culture that most of us that there are wide disparities in who actually believes in the scientific method and scientific progress and who don't. And those divisions are why the United States is struggling so much with this disease. You can blame uh, the federal government, you can blame the politicization of the CDC, but really we need to just look in the mirror and really ask ourselves to what has COVID-19 really exposed about how I really view the world, um, because it has really shown some deep division. So COVID, I mean, we've got the vaccine now, several vaccines. So yeah, COVID-19 for many reasons, and we'll come back to it on a local
Yeah, well,
level
I know
later,
we'll come back to it in
really
many ways here.
significant.
Yeah, we'll come back to it in several different forms here. Uh, and thank you for bringing that sort of, I would thought, a theological, spiritual thoughts there. We're going to keep doing that, and that's what Dr. Vince can do for us today, is show us some of the spiritual things and the things that we should be doing more. And we always got to question ourselves on that front. And I think this virus has done that. And these other topics, too, are going to do that, too, I think, somewhat. Uh, Another topic that happened in late, you see, this was in late May, I believe, when this came about, most of this. I mean, this current, about the killing of George Floyd and these other killings too. The killing of unarmed African Americans, the Black Lives Matter, and we have George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmed Arbery. Is Ahmed the one that was shot by those guys from the truck and all
The
that?
father and the son in Florida, yeah, or
Yeah,
Georgia,
that
one
was
of the two.
miserable. That was
Yes,
horrible.
yes,
Yeah. So,
that was his.
and
Yes, that was
I'm
him.
just going to put up briefly here. Here's a picture of George Floyd. When he looks very handsome man there, and we know about that quite a bit. I think a lot of us. But give us some thoughts on these killings of unarmed African Americans and Black Lives Matter.
Well, certainly, one of those disparities unleashed by COVID was race. And one of the things we saw, whether it was Ahmed Arbery, Breonna Taylor, um, George Floyd, and others, was the killing, the murders of unarmed Black people continuing. And the protests that began long ago. In fact, just today, the police officers who murdered Tamir Rice uh, 8 years ago were officially cleared of any wrongdoing. So what we saw with that officer in Minneapolis with his knee on George Floyd's neck, squeezing the life out of him that he can't breathe, calling out for his dead mother to save him, right? What was awoken in that moment was that we live in a society with some institutional racism that goes very deep, and the police is one of those institutions that has had the power to take the lives of innocent African Americans, of unarmed African Americans at will. And so the protest movement, the Black Lives Matter has been around, as a statement since 2014. But the calls for police reform, the calls for really examining police brutality, why it happens, and how do we as a society view the role of public safety. That's really what has caught fire. And so you've had all of these departments begin to take a look at these questions, and things like body cameras and so on. uh, and so right now, the impact of the George Floyd killing, I'm hoping, is going to continue into 2021 for the calls for true and real police reform. Because our institutions, what 2020 showed us is that uh, the institutional framework of law enforcement has no accountability when it comes to these matters. And then you had um, Kenosha, and the young man who was shot by the police, shot in the back 7 times. And then you got this young white kid who goes up to Kenosha, who's armed by his mother, who kills 2 people, and he's out on bail.
Yeah.
The 2020 showed in a real graphic, in your face way that the depths of institutional racism in this country are profound, and we've got to start to deal with this issue,
Right.
and not just give lip service. Oh, well, my parents didn't own slaves, so I'm not a racist. That's baloney. Oh, that was years and years. No, baloney. We
Yeah.
have to recognize that there must be a sustained awareness towards becoming an anti-racist society if we're going to survive. And I'll tie that up later
Okay.
with some other remarks. But that was significant, right? We have to see that race and racism is fundamental to what happens in this country, right? For good or bad. So we'll move on.
Yeah. And some of these, most of these protests after George Floyd, which really got things going, were very young, multiracial,
Mm-hmm.
and I think
Mm-hmm.
it set a tone that the country's,
Mm-hmm.
uh, sad to say, George Floyd's death might have caused a lot of rethinking and new thinking, I think.
Well, I think what it's shown is, and I've, one of the great things about the resistance, that movement that has come up because of the killing of George Floyd, is that it is young, it is multiracial, it
Right.
is intergenerational, and that is significant. That there are a growing number of whites in this country who
Right.
recognize the deep problematic nature of systematic racism. But our leadership at many levels in many different places and common people that we all know who are white still deny that racism is even real.
Right.
So there is much work to be done on that front.
Yeah, it is. And I know churches have, some have stepped up, some have just been on the sidelines, but let's hope more Christian people step up, and churches do too, on these matters.
Hmm.
Uh, there's something, I've been out to California usually in this time of year, but this year with COVID, I didn't go out to visit my cousin. I do that by train normally. Nice train, Amtrak. It's a nice little ride. But when I've been out there, there's always been the potentials for fire. And this last year, we had some really massive fires there on the West Coast and in California. I'm going to put up one picture here. We can sort of see it on the side there. That was called the Apple Fire, and it was near Belmont, California, north of, excuse me, Beaumont, California, and that was in the end of July.
Yeah, so California, Oregon, Washington all suffered significant fires this fire season, the worst many have said in a century, and it really has claimed or shown us the real significance of climate change. Um, the rains, the precipitation in the winter is not enough throughout the spring and summers to keep the vegetation where it's supposed to be, and so you have massive times of hot weather, extremely hot in the spring, and then the summer comes with very little precipitation, which creates all of this dried out forest area. And so this year, over 1 million acres burned. The fire in Colorado that was so horrific. The fires in Washington state that were so large. And so those fires show us that really we need to come face to face as well with the true existential threat to our planet, which is climate change. And by not uh, really aggressively looking at this, and by not having real policy that is addressing climate change in any significant way, these kind of events are going to become more problematic, more widespread, and more significant. We had the most named hurricanes since in over a century this season. We've had the worst fire year this year. This year, 2020, was the warmest ambient global temperature, set a new record over the last record, which was 2019, which was the record over 2018, which was the record over 2017. So we are really in a position where if the IPCC report is correct, and I believe the science that went into that report, uh, we are burning carbon at a level at which we may have already hit the point where we can't go back. The tipping point may have already been reached. And so you cannot get more fundamental than ecological catastrophe. And in California, it was an ecological catastrophe, these fires, on top of, right, a pandemic. And so it was really difficult in California when this happened, and Colorado as well. And so we have to really take account of climate change and be willing to make real change at the individual level, but also at the larger systemic level. I'll just say this and I'll be done with this when we can move on. But when we're talking about pollution and carbon emissions, we can recycle as consumers and we must do that. And I'm all for that. But until we make the producers of products go to a green chemistry, go to more sustainable production lines, force them to create reusable materials in what they're making, we have a problem. Like, for example, we already know that everything that is plastic right now can be produced with two things: bamboo or hemp. But we're not pursuing those alternatives, and yet um, it would produce a double whammy, right? The bamboo and the hemp are great absorbers of carbon, they are make biodegradable products, which would solve the plastic situation.
Yeah,
And
that plastic
we've
situation
got
is big
we
issue.
have to do this. We
Yeah.
have to do it because these fires and hurricanes and tornadoes and other climatic events, cyclones in Asia, are only going to get more pronounced and more significant if we do nothing.
Uh, this also relates to the virus too. That it's been brought up that deforestation brings these animals and other. And this is where we get these viruses from. I forgot the terminology, but it goes from animals to humans. These viruses,
And
and
the very truth is, well, once the Museum of uh, Natural History reopens again in Chicago, you can go, and when you go through the museum, what you find is that we have gone through 5 major extinctions on this planet. We are in the middle of a sixth extinction right now. 20 to 30 animal species go extinct every week.
yeah.
And so what happens epidemiologically is that these viruses, to, in terms of survival, jump hosts. And so as we wipe out other species, these kinds of viruses and so on are going to continue to happen and
Oh,
get
they're going to
worse
be happening.
because for survival, they're going to jump from one host to a new host.
Right. And this corona, I guess it's coronavirus is just a general term for a whole mess of viruses. So,
Hmm.
and look, there's more coming. So we got to be prepared for that. That's another story. We got to get our country ready for more viruses. Now we're going to go a little international here. And I understand that you were and you visited and know friends in Beirut. So why don't you update us a little about this? Is on the right here is a little from that explosion from, and I guess I don't really know what it was. Maybe it was nitrates or something, or could have been bomb making material at the port. I don't know, but it did happen. It was horrible. So, Dr. Vince, what do you say about the Beirut explosion?
Yeah. Well, first of all, what happened was the government was storing several tons of ammonium nitrate at the port, which it was supposed to have been working to distribute and get rid of. But the Beirut government has been mired in some of its own
Right,
inefficiencies, instabilities, and so on.
right.
And so a fire broke out at the port, which ignited what ultimately was the equivalent of a kiloton blast of TNT, and did significant damage to Beirut, killed over 300, 3,500 that I know of, injured right in the downtown central business district by the port, and just a devastating blow to Beirut, a country that was already reeling under the refugee crisis, from Syria, and
Right.
now had this major explosion that was felt for hundreds of miles around the country. And several friends, yes, I have personal friends who were some couple of them had their businesses destroyed by the blast. Several became homeless because they lived in the business district. Others have been doing amazing work to rebuild and clean up and try and deal with the aftermath of this blast. And it really kind of faded from the headlines after 2 or 3 days. But the people of Beirut have been working tirelessly just to try and rebuild after the blast, and it will be decades before Beirut. Let me say it this way: the Civil War did not cause as much property damage in Beirut as this blast. And so rebuilding will be it's just such a significant task. And so Red Cross is in Beirut. Look up, there are several other agencies working in Beirut, and they are in need of finances still. As they clean that up, so yeah, it was a tremendous story in the Middle East, I think.
Yeah, and then the governments there have been sort of divided. It's basically Christian and then Muslim parties, and can they
Right.
get together here? Can they get together and do something good here
Well,
on this
we
rebuilding?
hope the Lebanese government is intentionally sectarian in nature. So the president is a Christian, and then the heads of the legislative, the parliament, one is headed by Sunni, one is headed by Shia, and so
Right.
there has to be a working together, and that has been very difficult in the last, I'd say, decade. And so uh,
Right.
what the blast did, much like COVID has done, is it has exposed all of these inefficiencies and divisions and cultural I'm going to call it baggage, but cultural disparities that prevent us from cooperation.
Yeah.
And it's got to be overcome.
Right. Well, we're at our halfway. We're going to get to our halfway point here. Here's the big, one of our big stories here for the year has been the election. And of course, we have our the presidential election. We can talk about other ones, but I think the presidential is what we were, anyway, that's been out there. And we have, of course, our candidates. And anyway, so we have our Joe Biden and Donald Trump, and what's your thoughts there on that? Of course, that's a daily thing here on the news. What's your thought about the election here?
Well, I think there's no question it's a significant event in 2020. I think it's not any earth shattering news that the response at the federal level to the COVID-19 was a disaster. No national testing strategy. Um, Even today, we're finding out that we are woefully behind in vaccine appropriation. Uh, Simple public health measures like wearing a mask became politicized. And so this election really was an important election. But again, like COVID, what the election did was it exposed just how deep the partisan divisions in this country are. Now, but there has the silver lining in this election, and I think this cannot be overlooked. More people participated in this election than I think any election in the 20th century.
Oh, I'm sure of that.
I've got to check my numbers,
No, I'm sure of
but
that. It's just the
80 plus
percentage of
million
voters
people voted
might
for
not.
Biden, 76 million or something
Yeah, it was
voted
like,
for Trump.
I think it's
And
80
so
maybe made for Biden or something, and say, yeah,
yeah, so this was the real significant part, was that we said, okay, let's make voting accessible. Now, the real story here, as I say it, is this: the amazing thing is that this many votes were that there were this many people were able to participate, because in most years what we have is the levels of voter suppression are so significant, but they were overcome in this election. So even though you were removing ballot boxes and uh, purging voter rolls, and the Republican Party has been out in front with the whole notion of voter suppression since Holder v. US. That's nothing new. What's happened this year was that despite voter suppression, uh, the numbers of people who participated
right.
was at an all-time high. And I think it also shows that is deeply divided as we are, that America, I'm praying, or I'm saying, recognizes that governing is a real thing that takes real skill, and it's not a reality TV show. And so the election of Biden, I know for those on the right, or many of those on the right, the election of Biden is, some kind of call to Marxist socialism, which is ridiculous. And all of those who voted for Biden have to recognize that not all Republicans are, white nationalists who applauded Charlottesville.
Right.
And so the real job of governing in the next 4 years, a large part of that is going to be the ability for not only just Biden, but for whoever the leaders are in the Senate and the House, to begin to say, and what is the real truth: to govern requires cooperation.
Yes.
It requires negotiation. So I'm hoping that Biden, by example, will say, okay, America, it's time to put on our big boy pants and govern the country. Not everyone gets what they want, but we do it together.
Yeah, and along that line, this week, the election in Georgia so far, I believe 2.5 million people voted. So they're
Right.
still
Well,
coming
and
out.
and that is,
So
and
that's going to be
this
that's
is
an interesting election to determine the uh, balance of the Senate and how that will
right.
go.
Well, yes.
If it'll flip
Yes,
to the
the Georgia
Democrats or
election will be a 2021 event, but yes, it is the runoff. The fact that there is going to be a runoff is significant, and as well the fact that Georgia went blue, Arizona went blue,
right, right.
Nevada went blue, um, Texas is purple, Florida is purple, and so and that it has alerted what I think is something very deeply troubling for many on the right, which is that this country is going through a demographic
Oh,
shift.
that's
And I
big.
think that there are those who have put their lot in with the Republican Party,
Right,
who, in their minds, make America great again means make America white again.
right,
And
right.
this fear of demographic change is driving their politics.
Yeah. Well, let's move on here to the what was happening. This is somewhat more of the local side we're going to be looking
Yep.
at here for a few moments. I'm going to take these guys down, and we'll bring up.
national story. The story in Aurora goes back to the national story of the protests, right? In May,
Right.
in the aftermath of George Floyd, there were protests here in Aurora. There was some damage done here in Aurora. There were people from all races and creeds helping to restore and clean up Aurora. And I think we have to be honest that the calls for police reform in Aurora are calls for things that, quite frankly, should have been financed many years ago and have not. So we're just now introducing body cameras in Aurora. That's something that should have been done a long time ago. Calls for police reform in terms of qualified immunity, redoing the re-examining the police union contract. How do we discipline and purge officers who violate other citizens' human rights? How do we deal with that as a department? And of course, on the other side of that is you have Chief Zeman. You've got Commander Cross and others within the police department who are trying to respond to the calls for reform, and that's great. The issue is that these calls for reform have to end with real policy changes, and that's the real question right now, which leads into the next story. I'll just go right into it, which
Yeah.
is the Citizens Review Board. Now, the city council passed the Citizens Review Board. People can sign up or apply to be part of the Citizens Review Board. I think it's an important step that the city has taken, but many have acknowledged that there are going to be immediate hurdles and problems for the Civilian Review Board, because the question becomes, what is the purpose of the CRB? And if its purpose is true transparency, and to have a citizen's voice in establishing policy and discipline within the force, then there are going to have to be changes in the way that the CRB is currently constructed. And so I'm hoping that whoever is a part of the Citizens Review Board and the City Council and the mayor will be willing, and the chief, to revisit, re-examine, retool the Citizens Review Board, because I believe that it needs to be a board that has a modicum of power to be able to truly investigate and have its voice heard, because it is the voice of the people. Nevertheless, I do think it is significant that the city council moved in this direction. They could have ignored the calls for reform, but they did not. So I applaud the city for trying to move forward, but how far forward they've moved is another question.
Dr. Gaddis, Dr. Vince, so do you know of any other suburban cities that have this type of thing, a civilian board?
Well, Elgin has a model that they are using, which is a review board, but it's citizen input from different parts of the city. Um, uh, and so they're probably our closest
Okay.
city that has a review board. There are a couple of other, Carroll Stream, a couple of others.
Okay. Now, something I know this is dear to your heart. We're gonna put up now about study circles. study circle, Aurora. You want to give us a little more background on this?
Sure. Well, this was, I think, one of the great things that happened in this city because of COVID, because of George Floyd, and unmasking these issues of race that are everywhere, including Aurora, including the Fox Valley. Myself and our executive director, Kathy Gaddis, uh, resurrected, if you will, the study circles model, which ran here about 15 years ago, where the whole goal is to get the citizenry engaged with each other in facilitated dialogue about race. We ran over 60 people through the first round of study circles, which started in September. And we will be gearing up for another round of study circles for the spring. So you can always go to www.studycirclesaurora.org or www.studycirclesillinois.org because we are also going to be doing study circles in Elgin and several other municipalities that are interested in doing it. And this had buy-in from the city, from the township, from the Aurora Police Department. It's got buy-in from all kinds of institutional agencies in Elgin. We had buy-in in Aurora from the Aurora Public Library, and what we've done is reinvigorate the discussion, the dialogue about race. And we have to do this because the beginning of change has to start with dialogue and knowledge. We've got to talk to each other. And that's what study circles has allowed us to begin to do. And so we'll be running another group in the spring. So I would recommend your audience go to www.studycirclesaurora.org. You can sign up to be a participant or to go through the facilitator training. But I thought it was a really significant move for the city. There were several, I thought, key articles written by Denise Crosby on this throughout the year. So, yeah, I think study circles was a really important ground up, citizen led response to what was going on, as well as the creation of several other groups. I would say, most importantly, the People's Coalition and Nick Thompson and Sharonda Robeson, who have taken that organization and allying it with Rapid Response Team, Indivisible Aurora, and so on um, to begin to work collectively of these groups that are out here trying to make a change, and to be able to, in a coalition kind of way, meet needs and address concerns of the citizenry in Aurora. So I think that's a huge story in this city.
Yeah, and then I think a story that you wanted to touch base with is basically how we're getting together here and doing things of a local impact. I know you told me you were about Marie Wilkinson, and the pantry was a thought, and uh, we have the food bank, the Northern Illinois Food Bank. I think Julie Yorko is going to be with me next week or so. She's the president of that. And then we have other groups. I'll put them up in a minute here. Then the Aurora Interfaith Food Pantry would be another one. And of course, my friends at the VNA are community groups. What do you think about
Absolutely.
our community groups here in our
Well, yeah,
local
it's been, what COVID-19 has done is put a tremendous amount of stress on all of the system, right? And what the good news of the pandemic, if there is good news, the good news that is happening has been the response by people in terms of contributing, in terms of giving resources, and also it has shined a light on how significant it is that we have agencies like the Marie Wilkinson Interfaith Food Pantry, like Northern Illinois Food Bank, like United Way, etc., in our communities, because these are now significant institutions. Because if you want to drive down Jericho Road on any of the days that the pantry is open, and you see the volume of need in this community, the volume of need is just significant. And so we need to support these organizations with in every way that we can. Um, but that has been the silver lining, that these institutions have been able to step up and meet the needs of the people of this city, whether that's COVID testing through the VNA, whether that's regular medical care through the VNA, whether that is food from the food pantry. I mean, it has been a tremendous response by local leaders, local agencies that are getting these services to the people. I think that's been a
I think
major
that is the
story
story.
for.
I think you're right. That is a big story, and I know the Aurora Beacon about every day has something along that line, and I've been trying to show that too. And I know you are. You've been trying to show that too. These groups are really significant in what they're doing. And then one last thing, we'll wrap up here. I gotta get down here and see if I may. Come on now. Well, anyway, it's about the mayoral election. What's your thoughts on the mayoral election here?
Well, certainly 2020 has unveiled three candidates for mayor. Of course, the incumbent, Richard Irvin, the first African American mayor of the city of Aurora. Um, Two challengers, Judd Lochte, who's an alderman in the city, and John Lash, a longtime activist, was a former member of the East Aurora School Board. And I think this election is going to be very interesting in the sense that I think some of the issues that are going to have to be the three candidates are going to have to deal with the question of how do we rebound out of COVID? How do we deal with that from a city budget perspective? What will be the position of the mayor vis-a-vis the next police contract, which I believe will be up next year? Um, what will be the position of the mayor in terms of job production? And can the new mayor, John Lash will be coming from a perspective of green technology and green policy to rev the economic engine of the city. The question will be, what are the perspectives of Lochte and Mayor Irvin on that? Mayor Irvin has talked about the redevelopment of downtown and started moving on that, which I think is very important. The question for the other two will be, how will they envision or re-envision downtown development? How do we secure more entrepreneurs into Aurora, more small businesses, more African American businesses? I think from a cultural point of view, there is, I believe, some pent up demand for the creation of a African American museum, as well as a Latino heritage museum, right? Because once you get outside of the DuSable and the Mexican Fine Arts Museum in Chicago, in Pilsen, there really isn't anything significant out here in the western suburbs. So I think it will be interesting to see where those three candidates come down on the investment in this idea of cultural production as a tourism mechanism, because that's really one of the key way drivers of economic development these days is tourism. So we'll see what their answers are on that. The other questions that the mayors are going to have to, or the candidates for mayor are going to have to address because of COVID and the lack of state and federal funding that has come in and leaving municipalities holding the bag, is how will we lobby and get Springfield to, or the federal government to get relief to the city so we can continue to pay and grow our fire, police, healthcare, etc., as well as how do we, or how will the city embrace um, non-governmental organizations that are working in these areas, and how will the city forge deeper partnerships with that? I would also say, lastly, that I think these candidates will have to also be dealing with the question of, in that business development, right? How do we invigorate or enlarge um, um, uh, uh, mechanisms to business incubators, so that we can get more small businesses off the ground and running in this community. And of course, lastly, is Aurora is a highly diverse community. We've got to be talking about diversity, inclusion, racism, and how those things, how do we work with those parameters to make our city a truly welcoming city. And I mean that in terms of the political dynamic of welcoming city, and how we deal with ICE. So all of those, I think, are really tremendous issues for Aurora, and I'll be interested to see how the candidates answer those questions.
Well, thank you very much for giving your perspective on these matters today. It's been a joy to have you with me here. I just want to thank you, Dr. Vince, for being with us. And Dr. Vince, we knew this was going to go longer than we thought, but it
Well,
did.
hey, that's just the
Yeah,
way it
no,
goes.
we won't discuss that. We're
Right,
just having extended talk here.
right,
And
but I will
each of
say
these
this.
issues is important, and I understand that. No,
Yeah,
we have important
I would
issues
say
here.
this to just wrap everything up, which is this, because your primary audience is the Christian audience in Aurora, and I would say this also about COVID, is that the church and those who claim to be followers of Christ must become in 2021, are going to have to become the vanguard of showing what true brotherhood is, meaning reaching truly across the lines of race and class and gender, and showing the city what it means to be someone committed to the idea of love in public, which is justice, right? What it means to be speaking the truth in love. It's really up to the church in 2021 to say, I'm not going to be guided so much by my politics as I'm going to recognize that I must love each and every one other human being and do everything in my power to bring people together. That is really the job of the church in 2021. We can heal
Yeah,
the divisions.
I think the slogan that they've used with Aurora in the past, City of Lights, uh, and it is a term that is used for Christians too, because Jesus talked about being salt and light. And I think you're right, Dr. Vince, that we should be, as Christians, Catholics, Protestants, Orthodox, Pentecostal, whatever you are in that Christian front, and our other non-Christian brothers too. We all got to be in light and show that love of Jesus. And I think for
Absolutely.
Christians, I think it's Jesus that gives us the example of how to show love. And we should be showing love during this pandemic to our other brothers and sisters in Christ. And they're all brothers and sisters, even if they're not in Christ. They're made in the image of God. And we got to respect that and do that. And
Amen.
can't be on the sidelines.
Absolutely.
Being on the sidelines does not, actually, the Bible talks about being lukewarm or being on the fence. We shouldn't be on the fence. We gotta be a light, a beacon, and that's what we should be. And I thank you for being with me today and sharing some of your thoughts on these topics. We're going to just say bye-bye here in a second, and we're just going to see you on next Monday. We're going to go past. We're probably going to repeat this on Friday, so this will be on Friday also. Again,
All right.
if you tell a
Well,
friend,
John, you have a happy new year, and to everyone who watches the good work that
that's
John
right.
is doing, continue to support John and ACMN and all of the work that he's doing.
Thank you very much for that point. Thank you very much for bringing that up, Dr. Vince. And so we're just going to say right now, and Marge out there, we have a Marge Logman. She's out there, and we thank Marge for her comment. She sent a comment here. So God bless and Happy New Year to everybody now. And we say bye-bye. And again, thank you, Dr. Vince. And we appreciate you. God bless.
Thank you. God bless. Happy New Year.
See you on Monday, Lord willing. Bye-bye now.